The reason why our campaign is called Jews Against Boris is precisely for the reason that many British Jews, we acknowledge, feel uncomfortable enthusiastically supporting the Labour government, despite the fact that they agree that the prospect of a Tory government would be far more of an existential threat and a very real existential threat for Jews, all minorities and all oppressed people. So
despite
it's about
what your chief rabbi would say.
Despite what our chief rabbi would say, indeed.
What's interesting about this, Eamonn, is our two guests today really demonstrate the division within the Jewish community about Jeremy Corbyn in a very sort of stark way. And what's I found interesting myself about the Chief Rabbi's remarks today was attacking Jeremy Corbyn personally as being an anti-Semite is actually quite different from challenging the absolute absence of action that the Labour Party is guilty of in the course of the last 3 years on this topic. And where these matters have got extraordinarily confused, both within the Jewish community, but also actually within the Labour Party, is that on the one hand, Jeremy Corbyn has a long history of siding up with Hezbollah and other groups that are committed to the eradication of the State of Israel.
He also has a long history of siding with the Jewish community against the elimination of Jewish places of worship and Jewish cemeteries and protecting the Jewish community in manifold ways as a backbencher before he became leader of the Labour Party.
Well, I think I'm very we should get into that record if we're going to do that. But what I was actually going to come to say to try and defend him slightly was the one thing that Jeremy Corbyn has always done is claim he was an anti-racist. The problem about him becoming leader of the Labour Party was having gone from being a backbencher who could say whatever he liked to whomever he liked because nobody really took any notice of him. Once he became leader and social media acted as an accelerant for a set of views that are completely unacceptable against Jews and against others, but primarily against Jews, and attacks on Labour Jewish MPs, the Labour leadership was seen, has been seen and continues to be seen to have done as little as possible. And what is really shocking is that Pete Wilsman, who was a left-wing Labour activist on the National Executive, who 5 months ago basically said in a recording, anti-Semitism doesn't exist in the Labour Party, it's all a put-up job by the Israeli embassy. His case, his individual case, is yet to be handled by the Labour Party itself.
Well, is that a party fault or is that Mr Corbyn's fault? Or Mr Corbyn de facto being the head of the party, should he fast-track that through? What are you saying?
It's both. It's both Jeremy Corbyn's fault for not pushing it hard enough and the people around him not pushing hard enough, but it's also the party's fault because it simply wanted the problem to go away. It did not deal with it.
Yeah, I actually agree with David that the party hasn't done enough to expedite cases of anti-Semitism. And actually at the Race and Faith Manifesto launched today, I think one of the most promising commitments that Jeremy made was to introduce new disciplinary procedures. In fact, an announcement that the Labour Party has and is doing that. And so that's clearly something that they're aware of failing on. But, you know, we're in a two-horse race. The Labour Party might be lax and have been painfully and, you know, unforgivably lax in, you know, hastening cases of anti-Semitic kind of disciplinary cases. But, you know, look at the Tory party. One of their MPs had a stag do that was Nazi-themed, and in their disciplinary process, they judged it to be not anti-Semitic. These people are anti-Semites.
But Rivkah, we're not looking at the Conservative Party, we're looking at the Labour Party.
I completely agree.
And is there something to address there or not?
There is 100% something to address, and I'm so pleased that the Labour Party seems to be beginning to take it more seriously, because I would wholeheartedly agree with David, and I imagine with Richard, that there's not been sufficient kind of mobilisation, there's not been sufficient empathy, but the Labour Party is changing and has a desire to live up to its anti-racist credentials. The Tories have no such desire. They completely ride roughshod over the concerns of Jewish people. And in a two-horse race, which we are in currently, when Rabbi Mervis says that Jews shouldn't vote Labour, he is shooing in a Tory government. And we know it. If the Labour Party doesn't win this election, the Tories will.
And Rivkah, then could I ask you, is the timing of this argument that we're having today, is that coincidental with the manifesto that was launched today by Labour?
No, of course not. And I
Why
think
not?
that there is definitely a desire to use this moment where race and faith is kind of front and center of the political agenda to forward the main charge that has been made against Jeremy Corbyn of anti-Semitism. However, I wouldn't say that Rabbi Mervis or the people that read him are bad faith actors that are trying to hijack this election to smear Jeremy Corbyn. What I would say is they're using this moment where race and faith is already in the headlines to make a case that they feel genuinely strongly about.
Richard, isn't it actually rather a dangerous thing for the three Jewish newspapers to attack the Labour Party as you did last year when you put out a collective front page, and you've done this year again as well, and support the Chief Rabbi's statements? I mean, you're getting very dangerously close to a political position where if Labour does get elected, the Jewish community and the Jewish newspapers are going to have absolutely no influence over an incoming government. And don't you think politically this is actually potentially quite a dangerous move?
Well, I think it's every newspaper's responsibility to stand up and speak for its readers. That's what we did, and that's what the other Jewish newspapers did. In terms of influence or communication with the Labour Party or a future Labour government, it won't be any worse than it currently is. Jeremy Corbyn, it's been like blood out of a stone trying to speak to him. We were knocking on his door for 3 years, and he finally gave us what he thought was an interview, what really was just him on autopilot, not really giving us anything. So relationships between us as a Jewish newspaper, and indeed the Jewish community. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn has actually spoken to the Jewish Leadership Council in about 2 years. So communications are difficult at best, shall we say. But I mean, look, I agree with Rivkah in many things she's saying. She makes a valid point. This is not just a Brexit election. It's a none of the above election. There are no easy answers. Boris is not your ideal choice here. But Boris Johnson doesn't get on marvellously with anti-Semites. He doesn't like anti-Jewish murals.
Are you joking? Boris Johnson has... I really can't believe that you're saying this. Boris Johnson is a man who's published as an editor at The Spectator notorious anti-Semites. He is a man who has, who's permitted a party...
me for the stuff I publish. Look, as an editor of a newspaper, you publish conflicting and contrasting opinions. There's nothing that you could actually
His
pin on
candidate
him.
said that the Holocaust was fabricated. His colleague, Michael Gove, said that the former neo-Nazi, Polish politician Michael Kaminski is a good friend of the Conservative Party. These are people who are chumming up with real existential threats to Jews.
There's only one main political party that has changed out of all proportion in the last 4 years. There's only one political party where anti-Semites and racists and far-left fundamentalists have enthusiastically joined a party, and that's the one that since Corbyn has taken over. And Corbyn will not call these people out because they are the people that has put him in this position. He will not denounce his core support.
Corbyn has denounced anti-Semitism in the party just today and is doing his damnedest to expel and suspend people who have committed anti-Semitic offences. I don't understand.
What does Jeremy Corbyn need to do for you, Richard, to start to make this right? Because this anti-Semitism row is not leaving. It's constantly surrounding the Labour Party, and that's not just affecting Jewish people, by the way. It's affecting all voters who know it's a concern. They may not know too much about the background.
But as a kid, I'd like to ask you, Richard, if you are listening to this today and you are saying you're listening to Jew arguing against Jew here about something that if they're not Jewish doesn't affect them. Does it affect them? Why should it be important to the general listenership?
Why should the danger of a Corbyn government be important to the general? Because it says something about Britain. If you're going to have somebody like Jeremy Corbyn with his track record, with his associations, with his allegiances, with his palling up to and showing genuine warmth towards people who, given half a chance, would slaughter every single Jew from Tel Aviv to Tottenham, sitting in Downing Street.
Well,
Richard, that is really insightful language. And as a voter and as a non-Jew, when you come out with such strong stuff like that, it just makes me think that you're being overly aggressive. So it's not warming me to your argument. We need to talk about facts here.
I want to be. I say this, I should say, as a fellow Jew of yours. So I want to be clear about what you just said. Are you suggesting that the Labour front bench and the Labour leader wants to slaughter Jews in Britain?
No, I'm saying the Labour leader doesn't see anything wrong with getting on famously with people that want to slaughter Jews.
I think this is the danger for the Jewish community, getting involved with language of attack on a political leader that is not actually particularly moderate and is not particularly well structured. If you're going to attack Jeremy Corbyn for failing to expel people who are anti-Semitic from the Labour Party, that's one thing. And there has been a clear failure to do that. If you're suggesting that Jeremy Corbyn in any way is condoning the murder of Jews, either in Israel or in Britain, that's something quite different. And I think you need to be very clear about what you're actually saying here.
No, of course I'm not condoning that Jeremy Corbyn is backing and supporting the murder of Jews. What I'm saying is when you have individuals in Hamas and Hezbollah that he refers to as his friends, and in their written charter it says in black and white that they want the slaughter of every Jew, no matter where they are in the world, then that is clearly a cause for concern. And a lot of people that believe that are the people that are now rallying to the Labour cause.
Okay, Richard. See, this is the thing. I don't actually agree entirely with Kate saying that we need to talk solely about evidence rather than feelings, because I think actually in the Jewish community, feelings are incredibly important and at an all-time high.
And would you accept, Rivkah, that the Chief Rabbi is speaking on behalf of most Jewish people?
Yes, and that anxiety that he's speaking to when he says that Jews fear, the prospect of a Corbyn government, that's real. There's real fear in the Jewish community, and that's historically legitimated hypersensitivity that Jews have to threat. There's a genocide that has happened in our lifetimes, not in my lifetime, but in living memory, against Jews, and it's understandable that Jews would jump at every small threat against them. So I understand Richard's feelings, I understand Rabbi Mervis's feelings, and those of many Jewish people in this country. However, today I met at this Race and Faith launch Lord Dubs, the man who, the Labour peer who came here on the Kinder Transport and who knows an existential threat when he sees one. An existential threat looks like vans turning up outside your house telling you to go home. It looks like police stopping and searching you on the street because they racially profiled you. It looks like the 139,000 people that the Tories let die from austerity. That is an existential threat, and that is the threat of the Tory government that we as Jews have a responsibility to keep out.
Why did you say today that, when you read the Chief Rabbi's statement, you wrote on your social media that you cried for an hour. Was it you cried for an hour before you met Lord Dubs, or you cried for an hour when you met Lord Dubs?
I actually said a minute, Eamonn.
A minute,
but,
sorry.
I mean, it felt like an hour.
Right.
I was planning to approach Lord Dubs and to tell him that I really admired the work he has done to forge bonds of solidarity between Jews and other oppressed peoples in this country. And I had imagined myself making a very civilised speech, but instead I just burst into tears and told him
I can understand. It's so emotional for you. All of this is emotional on all sides.
What I told him, I cried that our community is so broken and our community has abandoned solidarity with other oppressed peoples, other ethnic and faith groups. Jews are nothing if they are not in solidarity with other peoples. There's a really famous phrase that one of our sages, our scholars, Hillel, says. He says, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? Mm-hmm. But if I am only for myself, who am I? What Rabbi Mervis did today is fundamentally un-Jewish. He is desecrating the responsibility that Jews have to stand in solidarity with other communities, not just out of principle, but out of practicality. Jews are not safe until all minorities are safe. The Tories have come for the Muslims, they've come for the black people, they've come for the travellers. Well, history tells us what happens next.
If your chief rabbi is saying, if the Pope was saying this to me as a Catholic, I would listen very carefully, but your chief rabbi is saying, a new poison has taken hold in Labour, and we've just been discussing this with Richard and David there, and he says a new poison has taken hold in Labour, sanctioned at the very top. To people who believe that, what would you say?
Just firstly to talk about the comparison.
Sanctioned.
Yes. Can I first address the comparison to the Pope, which Matt Chorley, one of your colleagues here at News UK, made today, and is, just to put it out there, quite a relatively ignorant comparison, just because the chief rabbi represents the Orthodox communities of Great Britain, the Orthodox Jewish communities. He doesn't represent all Jews in the way that the Pope might represent Catholics. So first of all, he is not representative of the Jewish community as a whole. when it comes to the kind of party sanctioning of anti-Semitism, this is now about intent. This is a question of intent. Does Jeremy Corbyn intend to allow anti-Semitism to fester in the...
It's not. I'm sorry. That isn't what this is about. It's not about whether Jeremy Corbyn in his heart has an intention to do this. It is about whether the Labour Party is an organisation that is now under intense scrutiny from the EHRC, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, a remarkable thing that a full-scale, legally enforceable investigation is taking place into a major political party because of the Labour Party's institutional failings to deal with a very evident problem. So it's not about intent, it's about action.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
No, but I don't
just let me finish
yeah.
for a second. And the problem with defending Jeremy Corbyn in the way that you are, and indeed attacking the chief rabbi's words as being, somehow ignoring other communities and the rest of it, is the truth is the language around this is already becoming too inflammatory. Jeremy Corbyn is the leader of a party that is institutionally failing to deal with a problem that has now been around for 3.5 years.
It's been around for a lot longer, by the way. And anti-Semitism is not a new phenomenon in the Labour Party. It's not some quirk of Corbyn's Labour. It's existed in the Labour Party for many years. Clement Attlee, that famous Labour Prime Minister, was himself accused of anti-Semitism. And I'm not saying this evidently to defend Labour. I'm saying this to suggest that the way in which Corbyn has become associated singularly with the anti-Semitism that exists in the Labour Party is wrong and is politically motivated.
Well, I don't think we want to get into a long argument about the history of this, but I actually think you're entirely wrong. I think it is quite clear, and this is where Richard's point earlier got lost, but is right, that because of a combination of Jeremy Corbyn being elected leader of the Labour Party and some of the people around him going in to advise him, along with social media acting as an accelerant of all of this, this has become a problem that absolutely did not exist 15 or 20 years ago in the Labour Party. It's a completely new phenomenon, and that's why it had to be dealt with effectively. And it clearly, you would accept, it hasn't been dealt with. And that is why Jeremy Corbyn bears responsibility as leader of the party.
He does. But there's a difference between failing to deal with something effectively, which I entirely agree he has, and sanctioning those failures. I don't believe Jeremy Corbyn is ashamed, it appears to me, of the failures of the Labour Party to deal with anti-Semitism.
Richard, Jeremy Corbyn believes he is dealing with this. He seems to be, if we take him at face value and everything that he says, he believes he is dealing with this. Is that, as the chief rabbi says, a mendacious fiction?
Well, he's not communicating with the Jewish community. And by the Jewish community, and as you've probably heard from Rivkah, what do we mean by the Jewish community? Obviously, there's vast swathes of different opinion and belief. But specifically the broad Jewish community, the organisations that say they speak for and speak up for the Jewish community, there is no communication going on whatsoever. There's no change of opinion. There's no rethinking. There's no sense that we get from Corbyn over the years that he's ever rethought things through or kind of said, OK, how can I learn? Where can I change? Have I gone wrong? Rethinking and reconsidering. So I can't see where the change will come. And I of course, he's not encouraging anti-Semitism. He's acquiescing. He's stepping aside, or he's kind of...
What about how the Brexit Party have stepped aside for the Conservatives? And how the right is coalescing into the far right. Is that not really the stepping aside that we should be most worried about, that poses the biggest existential threat to Jews?
OK, folks, well, we'll put that question out to you. You've heard what Rivkah's had to say. She's a Labour Party member. She's an activist with Jews Against Boris. You've also heard from Richard Ferrer, editorial director at the Jewish News and Media Group. And you've also heard from the political commentator David Kogan.